All right, everybody. Happy afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world. And welcome to today's Security Boulevard webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am super excited to have this panel discussion today. We have a great webinar on tap, lots of great topics to go over. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded. So if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. And so at any time during today's presentation or discussion, you have a question for either of our panelists, please don't wait, don't hesitate. Just go ahead and use your question and answer interface there on your web interface and submit your question. And we'll actually take questions throughout the webinar. So please, like I said, don't wait to get your question in for a question and answer session. Also, we have a great interactive chat feature. So please, love to hear your thoughts on today's topic at any time during the presentation. Just go ahead and use that chat window as well. We're also going to be giving away an infographic that goes along with today's presentation. That is going to be sent to you via email after today's webinar. You'll be receiving the link in an email that goes out after the webinar, along with the link to today's on-demand session. And finally, last but certainly not least, we are going to be doing a drawing at the end of today's webinar for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you will be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's discussion around securing the cloud. This is, as I said, it's a panel discussion, and we are featuring today Guy Eisenkot, who is co-founder and VP of Product Management at Bridge Crew, and Raj Malampati, who is the COO of CloudKnox. Guy and Raj, thank you so much for joining me today. I surely appreciate your being here.
Happy to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So cloud security is a big topic. There are so many things that we could go over it, but you know, when we're talking about, especially within the last year or so, so many organizations have adopted cloud. They've migrated entire workloads to the cloud. They've adopted more SaaS applications as they shift to remote work. Obviously, those 2 factors alone have placed a greater emphasis on cloud security as more organizations embrace both the value and the efficiency that the cloud brings. So, you know, when you take that and you also take the fact that we've got this whole new generation of cloud native technologies, such as Kubernetes and containers, that are really kind of putting the spotlight on the cloud in general. Obviously, there are issues that are kind of cropping up around cloud security with respect to containers and the ephemeral nature of those, which we're probably not going to get into as much, but they're certainly worth you know, at least mentioning in our discussion today. We actually do have another webinar planned on cloud native technologies and cloud native security as well. So, but do want to mention that as well. But you know, as I said, we will definitely take a look at security implications of the cloud as a whole from the user and the vendor perspective. So, and talk about how teams can effectively manage security as part of their cloud strategy. So lots and lots that we're going to be talking about. And I definitely want to kick off the conversation. But before we do, I'm going to take this little title slide down, and I'm going to ask each one of you to kind of introduce yourselves to the audience. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and whatever else you want to mention. So Guy, why don't we go ahead and get started with you?
Would love to. Hi, Charlene. Hi, Raj. So for me, pretty brief background. I've been doing security for about 10 years now. My current venture is called Bridge Crew. You might have heard about it. We are 2 years old, actually, and we are a developer-centric platform for cloud security. Before founding and joining this wonderful team in Bridge Crew, I spent about 4.5 years developing an additional startup in the user behavior analytics space, eventually getting acquired by RSA Security back in 2018. And before that, like practically every other Israeli in the industry spent some time in intelligence services here in the Israel Defense Forces, and kind of had an early start at the age of 18 into this entire ordeal.
All right, great. Ordeal, huh? That doesn't sound very good, but all right, Raj, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and all that good stuff.
Thank you. First and foremost, Guy, congratulations on the acquisition, or the pending acquisition, I would say, to with Palo Alto Network. So again, I'm sure you guys will do phenomenally well there. Background-wise, Raj Mompati, I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at CloudNox Security. CloudNox Security is a permissions management platform for multi-cloud, hybrid cloud infrastructure, right? So what I mean by that is we manage permissions associated with any given identity, human or service accounts or applications, etc., for any of these identities accessing AWS, Azure, GCP on the public cloud side, and then on the on-prem side, VMware vSphere, right? So that's what we do. My background, again, I used to actually work at VMware, what I call during the heydays of VMware back in 2006, 2007, all the way till 2013, and then ended up doing mobile security at a company called Mobile Iron. And then, endpoint security in another smaller startup, and then now at CloudNox, right? So that's my journey. It's been always a combination of infrastructure as well as security. I mean, famously or infamously, I was one of the guys who actually invented the term VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure. So either you like it or you hate it, but I will always be associated with that.
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. And yeah, I've used that term often in both positive and negative connotations. So we'll just leave that there. So, all right, I want to give a quick shout out to Christopher and Brian and John and Madan and Rob and Yoon, who have all chimed in with where they're from. So thank you all for joining us today. I have a feeling it's going to be a great conversation. So let's dive right into it. So I guess when we're talking about cloud and we're talking about security, when you're talking about cloud security in general, the first thing that kind of comes up with that comes to mind for a lot of people is how to secure the cloud, and you can't really have that discussion without understanding whether we're talking about cloud infrastructure, we're talking about cloud applications. When we're talking about cloud security, Raj, I know your organization really focuses more on infrastructure, but do the threats kind of change between we're talking about cloud infrastructure security and cloud application security, and what are kind of the tacks, if you will, the paths that organizations need to go down when they're considering cloud security? So Raj, I'm going to let you start the conversation, and then Guy, if you want to go ahead and chime in, go right ahead.
Sure. So from a cloud perspective, as you pointed out, right? So from my perspective, one of the largest or one of the most challenging vectors, I would say, attack vectors, is certainly identity, right? I mean, again, I'm not, most people know this, that, the whole notion of perimeter doesn't exist, so to speak. And I'm sure all of us have heard the cliche word, identity is the new perimeter, right? But the key again here is that ultimately the best way for you to manage security in the cloud is by managing the identity, managing the devices associated with identity at a broad level. Fundamentally, if you think about it, and if I start at that level, it's very similar for both SaaS-based applications as well as infrastructure. But this is again where it's the nitty-gritty details, or the details that actually change significantly, right? The way you manage security now, if you do a double click in terms of cloud infrastructure, is going to be different than how you want to manage SaaS-based applications. But at the high level, that's partly what you want to do, is manage access that is associated with any given identity, right? And that's fundamentally, again, a core premise for everything that we do, right? How do I manage identity? And side note, one of the key things that folks forget or don't necessarily think about is identity is not just humans, right? It's the non-human identity or machine identities that are, again, very, very critical to manage. And then we'll go, as we talk through, we'll go through more details. Guy, what do you think?
Love the fact that you started out with identities. I think one of the things that I like to think about, I look at, my personal journey into the cloud in the last 5 years. My previous company, we did identity and Active Directory. In this company, we're doing a lot of work with identity, with cloud provider identity management, and concepts are the same, terminology is exactly the same. In some cases, the underlying technology is really practically the same, but so much has changed. And when I think about cloud and cloud security, I always try to be reflective about everything that got abstracted away once companies, even a company like our own, made the transition into the cloud. So when I look at identity as an example, I think network and everything that happened around how we create boundaries and define and identify boundaries, whether those are identity-based or network-based, you understand that what the cloud has done for us, it democratized things. So if I compare 5 years ago, single AD, Active Directory admin in the organization. Today, probably 50, 60, 70 people in a mid to a large size organization that have access to forming, changing, and granting identities and changing them throughout the company's lifecycle. So I think this notion of abstraction of concepts that were pretty well defined, very centrally managed, in a cloud ecosystem are suddenly becoming democratized, crowdsourced, and actually very prone to human error. So if you had one person who was really in charge of configuring, of managing, of really knowing what's going on right now, Raj, you'll I think recognize that now we have everybody to account for us, right? So we have a development organization. Entire companies' cloud footprints are now defined by essentially everybody, and I think that's one of the things that has made this industry so interesting, because it's really becoming, specifically for security, something that's not siloed to a specific person in the company, but really something that's much more of a team sport.
Yeah, Guy, the other piece also that I see more and more, and Charlene, is that, almost every organization I talk to, I mean, more so in the larger organizations, right, pretty much they have multiple different types of, lack of better words, single sign-on solutions, right? You could think of it as Ping, Okta, I mean, they could be using Azure AD, etc. So there's a huge amount of, lack of better words, diversity in that, right, or democratization going on there. Then the second key piece also is just a sheer number of people and the types of different organizations to belong to, right, accessing cloud infrastructure. And then the last one, I mean, it's just the magnitude of, or just the different types of cloud infrastructure that developers want. I mean, it's just exploded, right? I mean, yes, historically they used to use virtualization platforms like vSphere, right? But in addition to that, pretty much every customer I talk to has at least 2 public clouds, right? I mean, pick any one of them, right? AWS, Azure, or GCP, or even Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, right? Almost every customer I talk to has a couple of them, plus they have an on-prem virtualization platform, right? So again, going back to what Guy just mentioned, right? So different, different authentication systems, different cloud infrastructure platforms, and then if you look at the SaaS applications, they're just exploding, right? So, and that's basically what you need to manage. Identity, sort of, you have to manage permissions associated with how they access their cloud infrastructure. Very different way of managing it, very different for SaaS-based applications. And that's what makes this problem challenging, at the same time extremely complex, and I would say dynamic too.
So along with that then, so since we're talking about identity and access management. You know, Raj, I want to go back to what you said earlier. It's not just people, it's also the devices. And that is extremely important when we're talking about the cloud, especially since, you know, we don't really have, you know, the edge of the network, or there's no perimeter anymore these days, it seems like, especially with the organizations, you know, working from home, and you know, I guess the edge is the actual device, you know, that's connected. So has that made I don't want to say made the process more complex, but how has that changed kind of the way organizations have kind of approached this process of just understanding and being able to you know, record or just understand who and what is accessing these cloud infrastructure, you know, for the organization. Has that changed because we're no longer just on-prem, but we're in the cloud? And to your point, you've got multiple clouds, and you know, it's and Guy, you said that there are multiple authentication technologies now. So I mean, it seems like it's become so much, to your point, so much more complex that it maybe is almost, dare I say, kind of an impossible effort. So how are companies kind of dealing with that?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Guy. I think you were about to say something.
Oh, I'm good.
Okay, perfect. So in terms of just the way I think about it is, look, I mean, you know, you need to have a trusted identity accessing cloud infrastructure using a trusted device, right? So, and this is again where, you know, again, my background also, right, in a mobile device management or enterprise mobility management solutions, right? So that's again a core component of this overall strategy, right? But more specifically, as we start thinking about more and more of the cloud infrastructure and how identities access that, right? Once you get past the fact that, look, the device needs to be a trusted device, you know, one of the key things that we are certainly finding, specifically as it relates to identities, is that almost every identity, right, they have to go through two things, right? One is authentication, right? So making sure it's the right identity, it's a trusted identity. And then second is once they have access to an infrastructure, right, are they using the permissions they have been granted, right? So think of it as, you know, making sure that the permissions that they're using are aligned with the permissions that they've granted, right? So that's sort of the way I sequentially think about it, right? Get the right identity, you know, into the system, but make sure that the identity is not over privileged, you know, if you think about it, right? That is again very critical, right? Because a lot of our, you know, it's fascinating that, you know, if you think about most of the companies, especially the ones that are using multiple public cloud infrastructure, right? They're certainly doing a good job of having the right authentication mechanisms and solutions in place. But then it's kind of like they're basically saying like, hey, come on in, but let me give you all the keys to the kingdom, right? Not necessarily the right thing to do, right? Everyone, you know, look, I mean, even if I give you 10 keys, but if you're only using one key, let me just go take away those 9 keys, right? And give you additional keys as appropriate, right? Again, long way of saying that, look, those are the key components, right? It is a trusted device, making sure that the right identity has the right authentication mechanism to get in, right? It's authorized to get in. And then after that, it's authorized with the right set of permissions, right? So those are the 3 key fundamental principles I think should always be in play when you're thinking about how to secure the cloud. And again, it's what I just said can obviously be applied to cloud infrastructure, any cloud infrastructure, as well as, if appropriate, to SaaS-based applications.
Great points, Raj. I think if I reference back, Charlene, to that point of the pandemic, I think if we just for a sec zoom out and think about how the pandemic expedited some of our pre-existing reliance on cloud services in a very broad sense. It's not just a public cloud service that's running an application or a SaaS service that's running maybe a non-critical component of your existing infrastructure or environment. This entire notion of a digitalized workforce is starting to take impact. We have much more time spent on our individual devices. We have more interconnected systems on our own personal devices in our entire architectural stack. And think of the bandwidth our employees have invested in the last 6 to 12 months in making this process very easy for them. That's what we eventually wanted them to accomplish. And when you take this kind of understanding and you zoom out and you understand that every developer's device, wherever it is in the world, and we serve organizations that have literally developers in all 6 continents. They have people all over the world with very strong levels of access into core layers of infrastructure. It's actually a scary thought, and without thinking of the scary thought of it, you really need to think of how we solve each and every one of these problems in a way that doesn't restrict people. People don't want to go back to the dark days of having to VPN to each and every corporate asset. We want to make it easy for them, right? We want to make it easy for them to contribute back and to build meaningful things, even if we are not physically connected. And this experience of tying this into back into the device realm, I think this is one specific area where the abstraction of infrastructure and identity and other componentry that we can do much deeper in the stack, where we can control some of these levels of access in a way that's non-intrusive and doesn't interfere in the work of people in our company, is probably the best way to tackle this problem.
So do you guys see, in kind of the rush to remote work last year, and so many organizations deciding that digital transformation was now something that, was no longer kind of, we'll get to it when we get to it, that it became a necessity for them to enable their organizations, their employees to work effectively and just kind of keep their organization competitive as the pandemic raged on. So many organizations really did make, just huge leaps to the cloud that perhaps they weren't quite prepared for. Do you think that now we're kind of maybe entering like a cloud security hangover phase, if you know what I mean? That, now they're going to have to go back and change all of the settings and correct all the mistakes that they made when they first dove in head first. What do you guys think?
I actually tend to think that cloud and cloud security in specific is actually much more forgiving when you compare it to the old model, for a couple of reasons. One, there's tons of flexibility and there's plenty of room to grow. I think when I look at some of our customers who've taken huge leaps in the last 12 months, thanks to COVID, thanks to the fact that tech companies have grown significantly, the demand for tech products have grown significantly. There was a lot of room for error, but a lot of room for trial, and we've seen people on our individual product and on other products that can help you even when you're confined to your own house and have to make meaningful decisions about security. There's a huge opportunity there. So I think cloud security is one of those issues where even if you got in late with the right help, especially communities, large communities that do cloud security are very willing to share, and everybody's kind of at least from our experience, we've been very open with sharing their experiences, and I have tons of stories about, our potential prospects, potential partners, and people in the industry that have worked around this periphery of cloud infrastructure that have made these huge leaps thanks to this communal sense of we're in this together. So I think that this was one thing that really encouraged me to see in the last 12 months, that even if you got into this very late and you wanted to see, who's the hallmark, what's the benchmark for doing things right in the cloud, there's already people that are setting the tone and really helping people, companies that are just getting started really catch up, which was I think an interesting phenomenon during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So, Charlene, what I have seen certainly is that, I mean, as Guy pointed out, right? So one of the key things is the digital transformation, as he's articulated, has obviously accelerated over the last 12, 15 months significantly, right? What would have otherwise taken 5-6 years in terms of driving the adoption of cloud infrastructure or cloud applications have effectively, it has happened over the past literally 6-9 months, right? Everybody's been forced to do that. But interesting thing is I've talked to at least 50 to 100 odd CISOs over the past 6 to 9 months. And almost every one of them, minus a few verticals that have been significantly impacted by COVID-19, almost everybody has had an increase in their security budget. Right. So, I mean, again, it's not just because of transition over to leveraging SaaS applications or cloud infrastructure, but also, I mean, think of the attacks that we have had, right? The SolarWinds attacks, etc. All this is what it's done is magnified the need for cloud security solutions. Right? Fundamentally, that's been a huge drive there. Right? So almost every one of the CISOs I've talked to has got an increase in their budget. So I actually think it's less of a hangover. It's more of like they're actually seeing their budgets explode. And what they're really looking for, almost every CISO I've talked to is, look, I don't want a point solution. I want a cloud security platform. And again, I know that's a very broad term, but the point they're trying to make is that, look, I don't want a security solution that just does something really good, but a very narrow focus, right? That's fundamentally what's happening. So, I mean, that certainly doesn't show any hangover. If anything, they're willing to be much more open about it. The second thing I wanted to articulate was even let's just say a risk-averse CISO is now, right, they're basically exploring new options, right? And again, it's and part of that, what that implies is that we have to go educate some of the big, massive gaps that they potentially have, right? So for example, right, we at CloudKnox, right, we do what's called a risk assessment. The whole point there is it's less about selling the CloudKnox permissions management platform. It's more about, at minimum, letting our prospects, our customers, all these enterprises know what's a baseline risk profile for your cloud posture, right? So that's what you'll see a lot of companies like, Bridgecrew will do. That's what all of us are doing. It's effectively educating our prospects and customers.
Okay. So CISOs, I got to tell you, I don't envy them at all, because I think they have just such a tough job to begin with, and burnout with CISOs is so high, and I can imagine just kind of what they went through over the last year or so. Do you think that because of just the high rate of stress that they have to deal with on a daily basis, do you think that they're looking to technologies or maybe other ways besides having to manage it all themselves? Are they looking increasingly to third parties such as maybe more vendor involvement or maybe managed security services providers or some other way to kind of augment their security for their cloud, because their cloud applications and infrastructures just because they're just recognizing that things are just maybe moving too fast, or there's just too much that they just can't handle it on their own? What do you guys see in that space?
Yeah, let me jump in first, right? So the couple of things, right? What they're looking for is, lack of better words, cloud infrastructure agnostic solutions, right? It's no longer good enough. Again, like I said earlier, right? That I rarely see any organization and any CISO betting on just a single cloud infrastructure platform, as an example, right? What they're really looking for is vendors who have a multi-cloud or even a hybrid cloud platform that does multiple, not just one component, but multiple. It's a broader set of solutions, right? So that's the first key thing. What does that imply? That implies that they're looking for the vendors to educate how does this platform help drive a much broader cloud security posture, right? So that's something that they're certainly looking for the vendors to actually educate them. The second question that you asked was, are we seeing sort of a rise in MSPs? I mean, the answer to that is it depends on the vertical, right? What I've seen is, like for example, the financial services vertical. I personally have seen that they're not necessarily looking at at sort of, lack of better words, sort of outsourcing their security to some MSP or MSSPs. Mm-hmm. They are actually doubling down in terms of actually managing the security themselves. But the key thing is they are looking for security solutions which are multi-cloud, hybrid cloud platforms, right? So, and the idea there is, look, now it helps me manage in my multi-cloud environment.
Interesting.
I've had a pretty interesting couple of years talking to CISOs in various stages, of our personal growth and development, and seeing, for example, how companies, some of the biggest ones in the world, have really changed some of the mindset in how to really adopt some of the latest and greatest best practices in cloud security. And one or two trends that I think are worth noting, we've seen this in some of the fastest growing cloud native companies in the world. To name a few, think of your Netflix, your Spotify, your Airbnb, your Capital One. These are all companies that we've talked to since day one, because we knew they were not only doing something right, but they've been doing this for a long time, and they have the perspective. We've seen two very interesting phenomena that I think later on throughout this short journey, we've seen other companies starting to pick up. One is this approach where, hey, I can do this myself. We've seen more and more security organizations maybe motivated from improved tooling, getting some better, some hands on some better quality in terms of technical talent, have really adopted either vendor-based products and also open source products that let them kind of carry on high-grade enterprise-level security from all parts of the market, whether that's adopting building blocks from their cloud providers and augmenting that with technology that they build in-house. I think that's super interesting to identify how these additional resources that Raj is talking about are getting utilized in the field. Mm-hmm. The other part of it, which I think kind of connects to that, is we've heard from CISOs that they're also looking for vendors to help them close some of the industry knowledge gap. When we think specifically about cloud security, it's not been around for that long. The number of really hands-on practitioners that have been doing this for more than 5 years, not a lot of them. You guys are probably more up to date on the latest salaries in the Bay Area on this talent. It's hard to come by. So very, very interesting to see CISOs that are looking to their vendors and their partners, whether those are managed security services, consulting partners, or even cloud providers themselves, to come in and really enhance and teach and augment based on the experience recently found from other companies. And I thought this was a very interesting case where, very clearly and well-defined CISO roles, when you think about it for the past couple of years, is really starting to take this sharp turn left with more and more industry knowledge and actually seeing that we all have a lot to learn from each other.
Yeah, and Charlene, one of the key things that vendors like ourselves, like Bridgecrew, all of us have to do is educate the CISOs, right? Educate based on what we see with our other customers, other prospects, etc. Right? So let me just give an example here, right? So when we being Cloud Now started doing risk assessments, one of the things that we found was it doesn't matter if it's AWS or GCP or Azure. What we found was that almost 95% of those identities are using less than 5%, in a lot of cases 2% of the permissions that have been granted, right? So educating, right, that's again something that people didn't realize before, right? Educating to the broader masses, the large enterprises, about like, hey, here is what all of us are finding. It's not about cloud knocks. Here are some of the key security gaps that we're finding, security holes we're finding. Is again very, very, very critical for us to do, right? Because I kid you not, the number of times I've gone in and most of our customers don't think that's such a big, lack of better words, permission gap, right? So just showing the magnitude is it almost always shocks a lot of these larger companies, because almost a lot of them, they know that they have gap, but they don't know the extent of the gap, right? So that's a huge amount of education, right? And again, they being the CISO are expecting vendors like ourselves, who are kind of like in the early sort of stages, as guys pointed out, of adoption, to help educate them, right? So that's a huge part of what all of us do, day to day, sort of on a daily basis.
Yeah, and it's obviously something that we try to do over on Security Boulevard as well. So education and information from practitioners, from guys who are in the trenches, from the CISOs, and from the vendors themselves. So I know that definitely there's always room for education in the security space. So just a quick shout out to folks who have submitted questions so far, but please send them on in. I actually want to go through a couple that we've gotten in. We got one question and one comment. I want to start with a comment because I think this speaks to what we were talking about earlier with the cloud applications and cloud infrastructure security. Andre says, I prefer to use an approach as a cloud security alliance's software-defined perimeter that can be integrated with strong IAM mechanisms. Do you guys have any thoughts on that approach and what Andre is doing?
I can speak for benchmarks and industry benchmarks in general. I think there's two main benefits to them, and then there's one big flaw. The benefits, naturally, one is it's actually a utility or a good vehicle to transfer information between the generations, right? So if we can all decide communally on a specific benchmark and then pass it on in a way that everybody agrees on, is a great idea. In cloud infrastructure, we use CIS benchmarks as an example to solidify this cumulative knowledge and to make sure that it passes on between versions of software. The other strong benefit is essentially that most or all vendors will essentially over time adapt and really start to speak in that same kind of language, and we have a MITRE framework for threat detection and more frameworks that are taking on very specific challenges. The one flaw that I think cloud security really highlights with respect to these principles, which are generally a great place to start with, is that you need to constantly be thinking about infrastructure, specifically in the cloud, as a living organism. And one thing that you can say about a cloud infrastructure environment is that it's constantly changing and evolving. Cloud security providers are changing the prices every quarter, or rolling out new services all the time. Sometimes you will build an entire threat model in the beginning of 2021. 6 months later, you will find out that developers have adopted an entirely new set of architectural principles that are no longer tied to those initial decisions. So the question is, do those industry benchmarks and frameworks really withstand the test of time? We've seen that in some cases they don't.
Yeah, no, that's a fair comment that Guy just made, right? But again, going back to what Andre said, right? I mean, if you look at the CSAs, the software-defined perimeter, it to some extent, what it does is it's leveraging some proven standards, right? Proven standards. I think if I remember it correctly, things like data encryption, SAML, etc. Right? So when it goes back to the core fundamental standards, it's from my perspective, at least, it is difficult not, to sort of say that it's going to go wrong, right? Because it's just the core basics, right? I think that notionally is certainly the right way of thinking about how to establish sort of a good framework, right? That with, I would say, strong IAM controls, right? I think that's what Andre was saying, strong IAM mechanisms, right? So again, the key thing that I keep stressing to folks is identity and access management is not just about how you authenticate identities into anything, right? Cloud infrastructure, SaaS application, etc. But it's authentication and authorization, right? It is a lot of people forget about the fact that authorization is extremely critical, and as Guy pointed out, very, very dynamic in the cloud infrastructure world, right? And that's the reason why you have to look at it, because that'll also help you get to the next level, which is figure out what are anomalous behaviors, right? Even if you have been authorized to do a certain set of things, if they don't follow some kind of pattern, historical baseline patterns, then I can go trigger, or I can go identify what is anomalous behavior, right? So again, I just keep on stressing that that's the key thing. Those are the two key things that you should be thinking about.
All right, great. So we just got a question in from Kelly. I wanted to address this one real quick. Would authentication and authorization also be a critical control considerations for API security? And that's one thing that we actually haven't touched on yet, is API security.
Guy, go ahead. I'm not that familiar with API security, so.
Yeah, sure. I think, so I'll piggyback on Raj's last comment. If we look at authentication and authorization, they're kind of conceived as two separate parts of the control plane. And in the cloud, actually, we do even have separate building blocks to build them both, if you look at your popular cloud native services. And actually, we're abstracting away some of the authentication, authorization that they do on a deeper level. Specifically around API security, I think there's good baselines today, even when you use some of the out-of-the-box components that we use as well. Out-of-the-box load balancers, WAF, you get pretty good coverage today from your cloud providers in that area. I know there's a growing trend of kind of evaluating and assessing API calls and securing them individually using things like your RASPs and next generation firewalls for APIs. Generally, great project for the advanced organization. We usually put it one layer behind the getting your bases covered with baseline concepts like the network encryption logging.
All right, great. So I did mention at the top of the hour that we would kind of be talking somewhat about cloud native and the security around cloud native technologies. And so I want to put it out to you guys, especially since APIs are becoming more a part of the cloud native conversation, because they do enable so many organizations to do more with cloud native in their applications in general. So how has cloud native kind of changed the security landscape and maybe the way organizations consider security, and and what are kind of the things that they do need to look out for? And Guy, I'll toss this out to you, so you can at least kind of get us started down the right path.
Yeah, I'll put down three pillars, Raj. Let me know if you agree with them. But when I look at cloud native, I think I try to model it around three core elements. First is human error, human behavior. I think I mentioned this before. One of the things that I think are drastically different in the cloud is that we've really empowered people in our organization to do a lot more than they could have in previous generations. Just much more flexibility and capability when it comes to defining the stack. And naturally, the concept of human error, misconfigurations, and how to handle those becomes a critical issue. Second one, we touched upon this topic, but it's supply chain. So now that everything is abstracted away, we're using out-of-the-box components from SaaS services that give us database services like Snowflake, all the way through our identity providers that can be virtual, like Okta that was mentioned here, and that entire infrastructure layer. All of those are now part of your tech liability stack. You need to naturally inventory them, manage them, naturally create a consistent model where you identify and acknowledge how these components interact with each other, and build a framework for yourself to identify when things are not looking right. And this is, we're not a big company. We have a pretty extensive tech stack. We probably pay the bill for more than 60 individual technologies. And I think that's probably not very common, not very uncommon, Raj. That last component, I actually touched on that as well, but I think it's really goes back to industry knowledge. I think we're really in the first kind of baby steps into this thing that's called cloud native. Some people have been doing this for 20 years, depending how you count. But really, when you think of the masses that have really, went cloud native first and built their first line of code as developers directly into a web UI of a cloud console, I think this is something that's practically new. And the question of how do we educate this new generation of developers on how to get things right when working in such a complex ecosystem is a huge challenge for security leaders. Raj, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. But one other thing that I want to also stress on the fact that it's not just human identities that we need to focus on, but a lot of the times what I've certainly seen from a cloud security perspective is that we seem to be maniacally focused on human users like developers, etc. But the key again is also to sort of focus on what I call the non-human identities. So think of it as like the service accounts, service principals, etc. Right. So that's one other. I wanted to make sure that we add to that. Right? That's again super critical across the board in terms of what you need to consider. Right. Other than that, absolutely agree with the notion that, look, I mean, we've got to go make sure that the supply chain is secure. It's not just about a single infrastructure. It's the Lego blocks, for lack of better words, that need to be all secured, right? That's again extremely critical. And last but not least, when you talk to CISOs, etc., right? A huge challenge. Again, this is just a side note. Is that it's very difficult to get expertise in any one particular, lack of a better words, cloud infrastructure, right? Tough to get folks, like who are experts in AWS, Azure, GCP, and guess what? Almost every company has multi-cloud environments, right? So what CISOs are looking again for is not necessarily hiring experts in each individual field, but they're looking for security solutions that helps abstract some of the complexity too, right? So I just wanted to make sure I articulate that element too.
Yes, and that is, I don't think you could have set up this one question any better from John, who asks, is there a solution for centralized security in a multi-cloud environment, and how is it integrated? And that is, that's an important question because, to your point, Raj, we don't have a lot of experience out there. We don't have a lot of folks out there who are well-versed in every single cloud platform. So I imagine any technology that's out there that's going to help the CISO and the security organization as a whole, create or have this kind of, blanket, if you will, security solution to help, just make their entire organization more secure, or their cloud resources more secure, is going to be very well received. So does that exist in today's environment? And do organizations need to maybe look to open source technologies to be able to make that happen? Or, are vendors starting to kind of keep up with that and provide more unified, centralized solutions?
So I can talk on behalf of CloudNox, right? So we certainly are a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud infrastructure, cloud security solutions provider, right? But again, the word cloud security, I always squirm because there's so many different components of that. We focus on literally 3 different things, right? And again, this is our objective is to abstract that complexity across Azure, GCP, Google Cloud Platform, as well as other public cloud and on-prem virtualization platforms, right? But basically, we are focused on, broadly speaking, 3 key components, right? The first one is, in the industry, it's called entitlements management, or you can think of it as authorization, right? So the best way to think about it is, once we are looking at identities, making sure we right-size their permissions so that they only have permissions that they need and that they're using, And if they need additional permissions, deliver it on demand, right? So think of it as a combination of least privilege access plus permissions on demand, right? So that's one component, right? But that's not good enough for every and any CISO, right? It goes back to the original comment I made. That just is a great beachhead use case, proactive way by which you can support or improve your security posture, but not good enough. Second key thing that companies like ours do is infrastructure, anomaly detection, and response or remediation, right? Identify anomalous behavior based on the AI ML algorithm we have. Once we identify and get visibility, provide alerts and fix it. And last but not the least is compliance, right? So again, you can see that we focus on three different components of the cloud infrastructure. But again, but there are so many other different pieces to the puzzle in terms of cloud infrastructure, right? And I'm sure folks like Bridge Crew do something slightly different, right? But the point again is, none of us are really a single solution platform. We are a multi cloud infrastructure platform with a broad cloud security, right? But it's not the end all be all, right? Just to put things in perspective.
Do you want to chime in here on this?
Sure. I'll try to be neutral as far as I can. I'm in a sticky position here. But I will say that I think I'll reference something that one of my cloud mentors told me a few years back. His name is Eli Khan. He leads the AWS Security Hub, and I think when I asked him, one of the questions that we asked him early on when we met is how does how do you, Eli, or how does AWS really see security? What's the top priorities, and how do you acknowledge all of this complexity on your side? And I think he made a very interesting comment. He said you can't think of cloud security as something that looks the same. You're going to have environments, and you're going to have cloud native stacks that were built 5, 6, 7 years ago, and think of it like archaeology. They're built in a certain way with services that were around 6 or 7 years ago. And if you built a cloud stack in the last 2 or 3 years, that cloud stack is going to look entirely different. And I think the challenge for both Bridgecrew and probably CloudNox has been, really try to understand what are the biggest challenges that companies today are facing with, and I think we attack the problem from two interesting areas. And when you look at the broad landscape of probable solutions to this problem, whether that's open source solutions that you can find free, all the way through to vendor offerings like ours, to what you can get almost practically free from your cloud provider. There's really an interesting but a complex task to identify what's the current needs of your existing cloud native stack, and what the market has to offer is relevant based on your current needs, and not only go with what everybody's doing, but really be cautious and thoughtful to your individual cloud native footprint.
All right, great. I'm doing a quick time check here. We're about 8 minutes to the top of the hour. This is flown, but we have gotten another question, and I do want to address that, which is Geetha asks, can automation be used to secure cloud services and applications? And if so, how efficiently can that be administered? And Geetha, this is actually something that I was going to cover, so thank you for asking that question. So whoever wants to take it first.
Raj, I'll take it. I'll take 1 minute.
That's fine.
Huge opportunity around automation. We've been invested specifically in the automation of how to take human errors, developer errors in cloud infrastructure, and revert them back into good states. Every company in the world has something that's called the CI/CD platform. It's one of the most easiest way to automate tasks in the cloud native era. In the past, we needed to spend lots of effort to build this type of asynchronous automation utility for us. So we're highly invested in that. Explore some of our work around security automation, specifically in cloud infrastructure, and you see how committed we work to that. There's so many manual labor hours that we can take away by automating these tedious one-off tasks.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing, right? So for any cloud security solution to scale in an enterprise, you've got to go automate it. Because one of the things that both Guy and I were echoing early on is number one is when you're in a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud environment, it's everything, the permissions granting, everything is extremely fluid, right? Mm-hmm. Fluid, and because by definition it's fluid, it's impossible, or next to impossible, I would say, to have humans kind of interjecting themselves a lot, right? So, from our perspective, automation is the three different components of automation. Number one is automating the whole notion of right-sizing permissions associated with any given identity, right? And doing it obviously rapidly, because otherwise it becomes a big security gap. That's one component. The second key component is just in terms of automation is making sure that you're detecting anomalous behavior, outlier behavior, right? And then again, automating the whole notion of the response as much as possible. And again, this is obviously going to keep evolving, right? And the third key piece is around the compliance side, right? Compliance side, specifically as you start looking at compliance and security sort of frameworks, right? If you do, again, right, you're out of compliance, you kind of, again, have to be continuously continuously sort of looking and making sure that you're always in compliance. If you're not in compliance, then drive the alerts and as appropriate, remediate it. All of these things have to be automated. One of the key things that we're also looking at is, besides sort of making sure that, given the CI/CD pipeline is such a continuous evolving process, right? The second key piece that we're also that we actually focus a lot on is how do we actually make sure we are integrated with ITSM solutions like ServiceNow, right? So that every time a change happens, it actually gets lack of better words, there's the audit trail, and if as appropriate, there is a ticket associated with it.
All right, great. Well, we are 4 minutes to the top of the hour, so I think we're going to have to start closing things down. I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions. I'll leave the question and answer tab open in case anybody has any very last minute questions they want to ask. But for now, I do want to quickly remind the audience that today's event is being recorded or has been recorded by the end of the webinar. So if you missed any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we are going to be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the Security Boulevard website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to securityboulevard.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Also, a quick reminder that an infographic will accompany today's webinar. We will be sending out the infographic via email. You'll be receiving a link for it, and everybody who did sign up will be getting a copy of the infographic. Okay, looks like we may have like one quick question here. Okay, nope, we just got a big thank you from Geetha. So thank you to Raj and Guy for answering the questions. Real quick, I did mention that we would be doing a drawing at the top of the hour. I mentioned that we'd be doing the drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So real quick, we'll go ahead and do that. Our winners today are Kelly G. Congratulations, Kelly. Second winner today is Tom T. Congratulations, Tom. Third winner today is Chris G. Congratulations, Chris. And our final winner today is Lydia E. So thank you to all four of you. Congratulations. Please check your inbox for information about your Amazon gift card. If you don't see anything in your inbox, please check your spam folder. Guy and Raj, thank you so much for today's conversation. I have a feeling we could have made it a 2-hour webinar and still not have gotten to everything that I wanted to get through. But thank you so much. I really thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and judging from the chats and the questions that we got in, I know that the audience got a lot out of it too. So thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Charlene, and good luck, Guy.
Thank you, Raj. Thanks for the greetings. Thank you, Charlene.
All right. Also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.